In many professional settings, speaking quickly is treated as a sign of confidence. The person who answers first, fills every pause, and keeps the conversation moving can appear prepared, decisive, and important. Over time, this creates the belief that visibility depends on constant contribution. If you are not speaking, you may worry that you are being overlooked. If you pause too long, you may fear that someone else will take control of the room. But influence does not always belong to the person who says the most. In high-stakes meetings, negotiations, and difficult workplace conversations, constant talking can weaken authority. The more you speak without purpose, the easier it becomes for your message to lose weight. Your words begin to compete with one another, and people stop distinguishing what matters from what was said simply to avoid silence. Strategic silence is different from passivity. It is not shrinking from the conversation, withholding useful information, or allowing other people to dominate without resistance. It is the deliberate choice to pause, observe, and speak only when your contribution can change the direction of the discussion. Silence becomes powerful when it is supported by attention, confidence, and timing. A well-used pause can do several things at once. It can slow an emotional exchange before it becomes a conflict. It can make an unreasonable request feel as uncomfortable as it should. It can encourage another person to reveal more than they originally intended. It can give you time to notice tone, hesitation, body language, and contradictions that would be missed if you were already planning your next sentence. This is why the quietest person in the room is not always the least influential. They may be the one collecting the most information. They may understand who is uncertain, who is performing confidence, who holds real decision-making power, and which ideas are gaining support beneath the surface. While others compete to be heard, the observant professional is learning how the room actually works. In this audiobook, we will explore how restraint can strengthen professional presence, how active observation creates leverage, and how silence can support negotiation, conflict management, and clearer boundaries. We will also examine when silence stops being useful, because strategic silence is not about remaining quiet forever. Its value depends on knowing the moment when one clear statement can accomplish more than 10 rushed contributions. The goal is not to become distant, mysterious, or difficult to read. The goal is to become intentional. You do not need to respond to every interruption, defend yourself against every assumption, or fill every empty second with explanation. You can allow the pause to work for you. When silence is chosen rather than imposed, it becomes a form of leadership. It gives your words greater contrast, your observations greater depth, and your presence greater control. In a noisy professional world, the ability to remain composed until the right moment may become one of your most valuable advantages. Authority through restraint. Authority is often confused with volume. In meetings, the person who speaks first, interrupts confidently, or keeps returning to the conversation can appear powerful simply because they occupy more space. Yet over time, constant contribution can have the opposite effect. When every thought is shared immediately, the audience begins to treat all of those thoughts as equal. Important ideas lose contrast, and the speaker may sound reactive rather than deliberate. Restraint changes that dynamic. When you do not rush to fill every pause, people begin to notice when you do speak. Your words gain weight because they are not surrounded by unnecessary commentary. This does not happen because silence is mysterious. It happens because disciplined speech signals that you are selecting your contribution rather than releasing every thought as it appears. In modern meetings, especially hybrid and virtual ones, this matters even more. People often compete with delayed audio, limited attention, side messages, and the pressure to remain visibly engaged. The result is a flood of repetition. One person restates a point, another adds a minor variation, and someone else summarizes what has already been said. A thoughtful pause can interrupt that pattern. It creates room to identify what is missing instead of adding more noise. The pause itself also affects attention. When a confident person stops before responding, the room often becomes more focused. Others wait to hear what comes next. This is sometimes called a pregnant pause because the silence feels as though it is carrying meaning before the words arrive. Used naturally, it allows your next statement to land with greater clarity. Used theatrically, it can feel manipulative, so the purpose should always be composure, not performance. Restraint also protects you from speaking before you understand the real issue. A question may sound simple but contain hidden tension. A proposal may seem complete while avoiding an important risk. A colleague may ask for your opinion when they are actually seeking approval. If you answer too quickly, you may respond to the surface and miss the deeper problem. Silence gives you a few seconds to separate what was said from what is actually happening. This is where authority becomes visible through judgment. People trust professionals who do not appear controlled by every impulse to react. They notice who remains steady when the room becomes impatient, defensive, or excited. A calm pause suggests that you are not borrowing the emotion of the moment. You are evaluating it. Strategic restraint does not mean refusing to contribute. If you remain silent when your knowledge is needed, you are not being thoughtful. You are withholding value. The purpose is to remove automatic speech so that useful speech becomes easier to recognize. You listen fully, identify the point that would improve the discussion, and offer it without burying it beneath unnecessary explanation. Over time, this creates a different kind of presence. You are no longer known as the person who always has something to say. You become known as the person whose words usually matter. That reputation is built slowly, through repeated moments of control. In a culture that rewards speed and visibility, restraint can become a form of professional distinction. Observe more than others reveal. Strategic silence becomes most useful when it sharpens observation. The moment you stop preparing your next response, you begin to notice details that would otherwise disappear beneath the speed of conversation. In a meeting, negotiation, or difficult exchange, people reveal more than they intend through timing, tone, hesitation, posture, and the way they respond when the room becomes quiet. Active observation is not passive listening. Passive listening waits for the other person to finish. Active observation studies what is being said, what is being avoided, and what changes when pressure enters the conversation. It pays attention to the gap between confidence and certainty, between agreement and discomfort, and between a polished statement and the body language that does not fully support it. This is especially valuable in high-stakes negotiations. When you keep talking, you provide information about your priorities, urgency, and emotional position. When you pause, the other person may begin filling the silence. They may explain further, soften a demand, reveal a concern, or expose the limit of their confidence. People often disclose valuable information because silence makes them feel responsible for keeping the interaction alive. The goal is not to trap anyone. It is to resist rescuing the conversation before it has shown you what is really happening. If a proposal is vague, let the silence remain long enough for the other person to clarify it. If someone presents a strong demand, avoid answering immediately. A brief pause can reveal whether the demand is firm or whether it was designed to test your reaction. Observation also means noticing physical cues without treating them as absolute proof. A person who looks away may be thinking, uncomfortable, distracted, or uncertain. Someone who crosses their arms may be cold, defensive, or simply relaxed. Individual signals are unreliable on their own, but patterns become useful. A sudden change in pace, posture, eye contact, or tone can indicate that the conversation has reached an area of importance. The most useful question is not, "What does this gesture mean?" It is, "What changed, and what happened just before it changed?" That approach keeps you from making dramatic assumptions while still allowing you to gather information. You are looking for shifts, not trying to read minds. Strategic observation also helps you understand the power structure of a room. Notice whose comments change the direction of the discussion, who receives immediate support, who hesitates before speaking, and who others look toward before agreeing. Formal titles matter, but influence is often revealed through attention. Silence gives you enough distance to see those patterns clearly. This does not mean remaining detached from the conversation. Your presence should still communicate attention. Maintain calm eye contact, take useful notes, and respond when your contribution can move the discussion forward. Quiet observation works best when others can see that you are engaged rather than absent. The professional advantage comes from collecting information before committing to a position. While others react to the first version of a problem, you notice the assumptions underneath it. While others compete to be heard, you learn what the room is not saying. That information helps you ask better questions, avoid unnecessary mistakes, and speak with greater precision when the moment arrives. Silence does not create insight by itself. Attention does. The pause simply gives attention enough space to work. Silence as negotiation leverage. In negotiation, people often weaken their position by speaking too quickly. They explain before they are asked, justify before they are challenged, and reveal what they are willing to accept before the other side has shown its real limits. The urge to keep the conversation moving can feel professional, but it often gives away leverage that silence would have protected. A deliberate pause changes the balance. When a proposal is made, you do not need to react immediately. You can take a moment to consider what has been offered, what has been omitted, and what the other person may be expecting from your response. That brief silence communicates that the decision matters and that you are not being pulled by urgency alone. Silence also creates room for the other person to reveal more. Many people become uncomfortable when their statement is followed by no immediate answer. They may add details, soften a condition, offer a concession, or explain the pressure behind their position. What they say next can be more useful than what they said first. By resisting the impulse to rescue the conversation, you allow hidden information to surface. This is especially effective when an offer is lower than expected, a deadline is unrealistic, or a request places too much responsibility on you. An immediate response can make the demand feel normal. A calm pause gives it weight. It allows the request to remain visible long enough for both sides to recognize its impact. Sometimes the other person will revise it without being challenged because the silence has already communicated that the terms are not easy to accept. Strategic silence is not a performance. If the pause is exaggerated, cold, or designed to intimidate, it can damage trust. The goal is not to make the other person anxious. The goal is to give yourself enough time to think and to avoid negotiating against yourself. Your body language should remain composed and attentive. You are present, but you are not rushing. It is also important to know when to ask a precise question instead of offering an immediate position. A pause followed by what flexibility is available can reveal more than a long explanation of why the proposal does not work. A quiet moment followed by what would happen if we adjusted the timeline can redirect the discussion without creating unnecessary conflict. Silence gives the question more impact because it shows that you are responding deliberately. In salary discussions, project negotiations, client conversations, and internal resource decisions, your strongest move may be to wait. Let the other person complete the thought. Let the number remain in the air. Let the request show its full weight before you decide how to answer. Negotiation leverage does not come from being the least cooperative person in the room. It comes from understanding that every word reveals something. Strategic silence helps you choose what to reveal, what to withhold, and when a single question can produce more value than a long defense. Thank you for reaching this far. If you enjoy how-to audiobooks, practical guides, and life-changing advice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps the algorithm bring this kind of content to more people who need it. Beeventa Audio is here to be your life's companion in learning, growth, and everyday transformation. The 5-second pause in conflict. Conflict creates speed. A sharp comment, unfair accusation, interruption, or dismissive tone can make the body react before the mind has decided what response would actually help. In those moments, the instinct is often to defend, correct, or match the other person's energy. The problem is that a fast response can turn a manageable disagreement into a larger confrontation. Strategic silence gives you a way to interrupt that chain before it controls the conversation. A 5-second pause may sound small, but in an emotional exchange it can feel significant. Those few seconds allow your breathing to settle, your attention to widen, and your first impulse to lose some of its force. You are not pretending the comment did not happen. You are deciding that the next sentence should serve your position rather than your irritation. The pause also changes the emotional rhythm of the room. When one person raises the pressure and the other responds immediately, the conversation can become a cycle of escalation. Each reaction gives the next reaction more energy. Silence breaks that rhythm. It creates a gap in which the other person may hear their own words more clearly, recognize that they have gone too far, or lower their tone without being directly challenged. This is especially useful when someone makes an unreasonable request. Many professionals answer too quickly because they want to appear cooperative. They begin negotiating against themselves before they have considered the cost. A quiet pause allows the request to remain visible. You can let the weight of it sit in the room before asking for clarification or stating a boundary. The silence communicates that the demand is not routine and that your answer will not be automatic. After the pause, your response should be simple. You might ask, what would need to be deprioritized to make that possible? You might say, I need a moment to consider the impact before I commit. You might calmly restate what you heard so the other person can recognize the full meaning of the request. The goal is not to produce a clever comeback. It is to move the conversation from emotional pressure toward practical reality. Silence can also protect you during interruptions, subtle disrespect, or microaggressions. An immediate nervous laugh can make the moment disappear before you have decided whether it should be addressed. A calm pause, steady eye contact, and a measured response can signal that the comment was noticed. You can then ask the person to repeat or explain what they meant. Often, the request for clarification is more effective than an accusation because it requires them to take responsibility for their own words. Strategic silence does not mean tolerating repeated mistreatment. If a pattern continues, you may need to name it directly, document it, or involve someone with authority to address it. The pause is not a substitute for action. It is a tool that helps you choose the right action instead of reacting in a way that weakens your position. The most important part of the 5-second pause is what it protects: your judgment. Conflict often invites you to surrender control by responding on someone else's timing. Silence allows you to keep that control. It gives you enough distance to decide whether the moment requires a question, a boundary, a correction, or no response at all. When tension rises, you do not have to race it. A brief pause can prevent one careless exchange from defining the entire conversation. It can help you remain clear, professional, and difficult to provoke, which is often more powerful than having the fastest reply. Silence as a professional boundary. Silence can become a professional boundary when words would only reward behavior that should not be encouraged. In many workplaces, people learn that pressure works because it produces immediate explanations, apologies, or compliance. A colleague interrupts, and you rush to recover the conversation. A manager makes an unreasonable request, and you begin justifying why it may be difficult. Someone makes a dismissive comment, and you soften the moment with nervous laughter. Each response may seem harmless, but over time it can teach others that your limits are negotiable. A deliberate pause changes that pattern. It gives you time to decide whether the moment deserves explanation, correction, or no immediate response at all. Silence can communicate that the comment, demand, or interruption has been noticed and will not be treated as normal. It does not need to be dramatic. A steady expression, calm posture, and brief pause can create enough space for the other person to reconsider what they just said. This is especially useful when someone expects instant access to your time. In a culture of constant messaging, quick replies can become an unspoken obligation. You may feel pressure to respond immediately even when the request is unclear, poorly timed, or outside your responsibilities. Strategic silence allows you to resist that urgency. You can wait until you have enough information, enough time, and enough emotional distance to answer well. The delay itself can reinforce that your attention is not available on demand. Silence also protects you from over-explaining. When people question a decision or boundary, the instinct is often to provide more detail than necessary. The longer the explanation becomes, the more opportunities others have to debate each part of it. A concise statement followed by silence is often stronger. You can say, "I'm not able to take that on this week," and allow the sentence to stand. You do not need to fill the space with apologies, personal details, or a list of competing obligations. The same principle applies when someone repeatedly interrupts. Rather than speaking faster or louder, you can stop, look at the person, and wait. The pause makes the interruption visible without turning the moment into a contest. When the room settles, you can continue or calmly say, "I'd like to finish this point." Silence helps restore the boundary before the words reinforce it. Strategic silence should not become avoidance. If a pattern is serious, repeated, or damaging, it may require a direct conversation, documentation, or support from someone with authority. Silence is most effective when it creates room for a clear boundary, not when it replaces one. The goal is not to disappear from difficult situations. It is to stop giving every pressure tactic an immediate emotional response. Over time, this changes how people approach you. They learn that urgency will not automatically control your decisions, that interruption will not erase your voice, and that disrespect will not be smoothed over for their comfort. The boundary becomes visible through consistency. Professional silence is not emptiness. It is restraint with purpose. It protects your time, your attention, and your self-respect until the right words are ready. Knowing exactly when to speak. Strategic silence is valuable only when you also know when to end it. Remaining quiet for too long can make you appear disengaged, uncertain, or unwilling to contribute. The goal is not to become the person who always waits. The goal is to recognize the moment when your words can add more value than the silence. That moment usually appears when the discussion begins to repeat itself. People circle the same concerns, add small variations, or compete for control without moving the decision forward. A thoughtful professional listens for the point at which more conversation is no longer creating more clarity. That is often the right time to intervene with a concise summary, a direct question, or a statement that organizes what the room has been struggling to express. A strong intervention does not need to be long. In fact, the more chaotic the discussion becomes, the more useful a simple statement can be. You might identify the real decision, separate facts from assumptions, or name the trade-off everyone is avoiding. Because you have spent time listening, your contribution can connect several perspectives without repeating them. This is how a quiet participant becomes a decisive voice. Timing also depends on consequence. If the conversation involves a risk that others have missed, silence has reached its limit. If a decision is moving forward based on incomplete information, you need to speak. If someone is being misrepresented, interrupted, or pressured unfairly, your silence may begin to support the problem rather than protect your position. Strategic restraint should never become an excuse to avoid responsibility. The same principle applies when your expertise is directly relevant. There may be moments when people are speculating about an issue you understand well. Waiting can still be useful because it allows you to hear how others see the problem. But once the key assumptions are visible, your experience should enter the conversation. Speak clearly, explain only what is necessary, and give the room a practical next step. One useful standard is to ask yourself 3 questions before intervening. Is something important missing? Can I make the issue clearer? Will speaking now improve the decision? If the answer is yes, the pause has done its work. The purpose of silence was never to keep you invisible. It was to prepare you to contribute with precision. When you do speak, avoid apologizing for entering the conversation or burying your point beneath unnecessary background. A calm opening such as, "I think we are dealing with 2 separate issues," or "the decision seems to depend on one unresolved question," can immediately create structure. Once the point is made, allow another pause. Do not weaken a strong contribution by continuing after the message has landed. Over time, this pattern changes how people experience your presence. They begin to recognize that when you speak, the discussion often becomes clearer. Your voice is not frequent, but it is useful. You are not competing for attention. You are helping the room use its attention better. If you've made it to this point, you're clearly committed to your own growth. Support this journey by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It signals to the algorithm that thoughtful guides and meaningful advice matter. Beeventa Audio will continue walking with you, offering how-to insights, practical wisdom, and a companion for every chapter of your personal and professional life. Build a reputation for thoughtful leadership. A reputation for thoughtful leadership is not created by speaking less for its own sake. It is created by showing that your words are connected to observation, judgment, and responsibility. Over time, people begin to notice who reacts immediately and who takes a moment to understand what the situation actually requires. The second person often becomes more trusted because their responses feel considered rather than automatic. This shift begins with consistency. If you pause only when you feel confident, silence may look like hesitation. If you use restraint regularly, people begin to understand it as part of your professional style. They learn that you are listening, testing ideas, and considering the wider impact before you commit. That pattern builds credibility because it reduces the sense that your decisions are being driven by ego, pressure, or the need to be seen. Thoughtful leaders also use silence to protect the quality of ideas. Not every idea needs to be announced the moment it appears. A rough thought can benefit from being tested privately before it is placed in front of executives, clients, or a larger team. You can ask whether the idea solves a real problem, whether the timing is right, what risks it creates, and what evidence supports it. This internal pause helps you bring forward ideas that are clearer, stronger, and easier for others to trust. The same discipline improves communication. When you are not trying to respond to every point, you can hear what people are actually asking for. Sometimes a team member does not need advice. They need room to explain. Sometimes a colleague is not resisting the plan. They are worried about a consequence no one has addressed. Silence allows those concerns to surface before you offer a solution that may be technically correct but poorly matched to the real problem. A thoughtful professional does not use silence to appear superior. They remain approachable, responsive, and willing to engage. The difference is that they do not confuse immediacy with leadership. They know that some situations require a fast answer, while others require a measured one. They also know that saying, "I want to think about that before I respond," can strengthen trust when the issue is complex. This reputation becomes especially valuable in a noisy digital workplace. Messages arrive continuously, opinions are shared instantly, and speed often receives more attention than depth. In that environment, a person who can slow down, identify what matters, and respond with precision becomes easier to rely on. Their calmness creates contrast. Their words carry more weight because people know they were not produced carelessly. Long-term career resilience depends on this kind of judgment. Tools, platforms, and communication channels will continue to change, but the ability to observe, listen, synthesize, and speak at the right moment will remain valuable. Strategic silence helps protect those abilities from the pressure to react constantly. The goal is not to become the quietest person in every room. It is to become the person who understands the room before trying to influence it. When your silence shows attention and your words create clarity, people begin to associate your presence with steadiness. That is how restraint becomes leadership and how a quiet professional voice becomes difficult to ignore. Strategic silence is not the absence of confidence. It is confidence under control. It is the ability to remain present without rushing, to observe without disappearing, and to let a moment reveal itself before deciding what deserves a response. In a professional world that often rewards speed, interruption, and constant visibility, restraint can become a rare form of authority. The power of silence does not come from withholding your voice forever. It comes from understanding that not every thought needs immediate expression, not every provocation deserves an instant reaction, and not every empty second needs to be filled. A pause can protect your judgment, expose hidden information, calm conflict, strengthen a boundary, and give your words the space they need to carry weight. Used carelessly, silence can look distant or passive. Used deliberately, it becomes a tool for leadership. It helps you recognize when others are revealing more than they intended, when a discussion has lost direction, and when one clear statement can restore focus. The goal is not to speak less for appearance. The goal is to speak with greater purpose. As you move through meetings, negotiations, and difficult conversations, remember that your value is not measured by how often your voice is heard. It is measured by whether your presence improves the room. Listen closely, pause without fear, and speak when your words can create clarity, protect respect, or move the decision forward. When silence has done its work, let your voice finish it. Thank you for spending this time learning and growing. If you value how-to insights, practical guides, and meaningful advice, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Beeventa Audio is here to be your life's companion in clarity, growth, and everyday transformation.